Hi, this is Tolec for the Andromeda Council. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, 2018. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the first segment of Deep Disclosure and Evolving Reality. As I said in the showrunner, as you might be aware, this is a very unique time in our history. Humanity has seen many things coming to light lately. There are many shows talking about disclosure, deep state, pedogate, memogate, Trump draining the swamp, let alone the number of shows and reports on the subject of the dinar, revaluation, global currency reset, and discussions of new financial systems and cryptocurrency solutions. There's also a greater audience appeal for things like cosmic disclosure on subjects such as the secret space program and the Earth Alliance. In this new program, we will cover all the current hot topics and will continue to reveal next level information. Deep Disclosure is an intersection of three subject veins that combines all these topics I've just touched on. It will be, to quote one of my guests, M, a triple dose of truth. This first segment is called Down the Rabbit Hole. Here we will lay the foundation and background about my two guests, M and Miss M, as well as construct a framework around the three subject veins I've outlined. Just know they have very unique and vast experiences across all the subjects we'll be discussing tonight as high-level insiders. My first guest is M. For the sake of his privacy and safety, we've agreed to keep his name private until such time that he might want to make it public. So, M has a financial and technical background blended with both spiritual and paranormal experiences. I'm going to give you some of the highlights of his professional knowledge, experiences, and accomplishments. A longtime IT specialist, he's focused on real-time effectiveness and efficiency, with over 35 years of expertise in implementation and consulting to such organizations as the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, the Pentagon, the Small Business Administration, Nike, State of California Welfare and Child Support, and 30 additional Fortune 300 companies. He's worked for over a decade with the White Dragon Dynasty elders, the governors of central banks, officials, heads of state, and former heads of agencies, to enact a new banking system for the betterment of humanity, commonly known as the White Hats or White Knights, under the YILAOE group, and currently for the White Hat Mission Society. M is the director of several trusts and foundations for global transformation, such as Prosperity for Humanity and People Helping People. This gentleman is also the founder and chairman of Global Net Systems, which is a meta-platform nexus of gold-backed cryptocurrencies, multidimensional blockchains, crypt banks that feature secure delivery systems and transactions. I'll let M fill in the rest for you and tell you as much about himself as he'd like to further qualify his expertise as a high-level insider, including his important financial involvement in the Cherokee Native American Nation. M?
Thank you, Tolec. It's a real honor and privilege to be here. What I'd like to say pertaining to why we're doing this is because there's a real important underlying aspect to having the truth about what's really going on. There's way more happening that's in a positive sense than most shows are covering. And part of the way to highlight that is there is a divine intervention, a divine orchestration that's been going on. And that began early in my life when it became evident to me that there was an invisible hand guiding me to the opportunities that placed me where I am today. Probably the most unique and obvious was when my father introduced me to a system that he created. And that system was so ahead of its time that in the mid-70s, it began to be the system that ran the IRS, the Federal Reserve, various agencies. And that's when my exposure to becoming a programmer and a consultant in that language enabled me to go to work at the Pentagon and the DIA. While I was doing my IT career, I had many spiritual experiences. I'm very left brain and right brain, and so it was natural for me to not only be a programmer to crunch out code, but also to do artwork and stuff. And that, I believe, was part of keeping myself open to all the spiritual experiences that I was having, like interaction with extraterrestrials when I was 29, and some deep experiences in Egypt. And those experiences led me to a deep desire to get more into the storytelling aspect. And I sort of backed out of being an IT guy and headed into Hollywood, where I wanted to do conscious media. And it was through there and learning about high finance and where do you get $100 million to do a film that I became exposed to the types of numbers that are involved with the elder money. And some 20 years ago, I met the individual that was responsible for moving the gold that underwrote the currencies in the G8, and that man was partners with Howard Hughes. And so I began to get pulled into everything that was going on pertaining to these super high numbers. You know, $1 trillion is a small number in relationship to the real numbers that are out there.
And that makes a lot of sense because, as you know, for many years, I was involved professionally at a very high level of international banking. And I'm certainly quite familiar with the kinds of numbers that you're talking about, whether it's billions or trillions, that money actually exists.
Yeah, and at the time, I only had instruments with like 50 M, standby letter of credit, maybe 500 M. And that's actually how a man that I was talking to, who was a big-time producer, said, you kind of have the same lingo as a friend of mine with these weird banking acronyms. I'm going to introduce you. And that man was like number 2 in command of the new banking system. And he put me on the phone with the chairman of the new banking system. And that was in about 2005.
Okay. All right. And so what happened after that, after you met these individuals, and where did your life go from there?
Well, it was based on my background and based on my other gifts and abilities. They were spiritual too, by the way. This is why I say there's clearly divine orchestration, because they were actually telling me about an acronym of an individual that was behind the scenes. And when I was 25 years old, I got pulled off the street in my own neighborhood where I grew up by a gentleman that was telling me about high-level trading platforms, the people that were controlling them behind the scenes, the Chinese elders. And he used an acronym, a name, initials, that was told to me by this gentleman that brought me in under their wing in Hollywood. And they began to mentor me in high-level trades. And pretty much over a course of a year, I got moved up into a pretty high-level position with them.
Okay. Now, I want to rewind for a moment. You said that when you initially met them, these gentlemen, this was 2005, and you used the words, the new banking system. And I know categorically from my own work that I was exposed to this concept as far back as 1997, 1998. the people, if you will, the good people up at the top that have been trying to make this change, they've been trying to make this change for years, haven't they?
That's correct. There was a couple attempts at doing a new system even before this that they shared with me.
Okay, all right. So here we are in 2014. And yet again, there's a lot of banter on the web and alt media regarding the alleged new banking system. How real is this possibility?
Very real. We are planning on doing some cryptocurrency as part of a new platform. But I think it's also important to realize that in 2012, when we were ready to pull the switch on activating a brand new banking system, and we had 102 treaties around the world to be the new banking system, we had basically inserted a new banking system over the top of the old central banking system. We had a new firewall, and for 5 years it was not compromised or breached by the opposition. And so when we were going to flip the switch, they knew it was going to be over. We had all the back codes, all the zeros with all the permission of all the elders ready to roll out to start funding projects, and we had picked, the top most important humanitarian things to do, and they couldn't have it. And in fact, we didn't realize how deeply ingrained they were and how deep the web of corruption ran. Right. Even though we'd arrested 3,600 people.
Wow. Okay, so you're so that we can be clear for the listening audience, you're talking about blocks of money in the hundreds of millions that were ready to be released to be pledged to trading platforms for humanitarian projects, right?
We were actually going to decommission trading platforms. We didn't need them because of the trillions upon trillions that were available for humanitarian projects.
Okay. So,
but absolutely, we would roll it out in smaller increments because you can't, upset the market by dumping $1 trillion in.
Okay. So for people that know international banking, you will understand what I'm about to say. And I'm not at all questioning what you're saying. I'm trying to understand how you would put this new process into effect. As long as the clearing banks, the central banks, and the systems that are in place to either approve and or credit and or debit money still exist, like DTC, Euroclear, SIX-SIS, SWIFT, and others. How would you implement this new system when the powers that be are still controlling those clearing authorities? And because SWIFT is global, it's been used for petrodollar currency exchanges, et cetera, et cetera. How can a new system be implemented when those systems are still in place?
So we had new mechanisms and vehicles that were going to replace those things. And when this came to a screeching halt, when they arrested our top partners, like the former heads of agencies, that were helping us.
Okay.
Those plans went out the window because they basically seized our system. So we had to start all over again.
Wow. So for me to redirect back to you and get us back on center about your own life and where your experiences have led to you today. We were talking about 2005, and of course, actions were taken to take out all the work that you had done up to that point in time. Where are we today with your career, your involvement, any other topics that you want to introduce at this moment?
Well, actually, before we go there, I want to mention that the intent of this show is to weave a couple different veins of material together, and over the course of at least a 3-segment show, we will come current, but I think it's important to have a deep understanding of how spiritual the foundation is, the divine orchestration and even divine intervention. For example, the partners that we did that new system with, they were all super spiritual, worked with the galactics, had communication with spirit guides, believed in past lives. So this has been a common thread even today throughout everybody that's involved. And my own spiritual awakening that began in my teens really outlines that we're here on a divine mission. And so while some of this stuff is very technical, it's important to realize that as we expose or begin to have a deeper disclosure and exposure to all of this material, you'll see the weave, that the only way that this can be accomplished, because of how deep and dark the cabal and 1% opposition, whatever you'd like to call them, I tend to call them banksters, the banking families, control things. You cannot move any money anywhere in the world without them, if they wish, interfering and stealing it. And frankly, they stole quite a number of billions from us. And so before we launch into where we are right now, I thought it would be important to introduce our other guest, as well as some of the threads that will tie together for a more complete story.
Em, thank you for going into that kind of level of detail. I'm sure our listening audience really appreciated it. As with my first guest, Miss M, also for the sake of her privacy and safety, we've agreed to keep her name private as well, until such time she might want to make it public. So, Miss M has profound experiences in the ultra-spiritual and galactic realms. She is a fully conscious psychic medium who has worked exclusively with a group of humanitarians affecting positive change globally and bringing prosperity to humanity. She worked in the beauty industry for several years, educating industry professionals about people and planet-friendly products, and now teaches individuals to access their own spiritual gifts and improve their health through natural living. Miss M is also an entrepreneur, and with her business partner M, she owns several businesses ranging from film production, new healing modalities, and other disruptive technologies. Miss M?
Thank you for that introduction. I suppose I'm going to echo a little bit of what my partner was saying and explain how I became involved in this and why we are really in the middle of a spiritual revolution on this planet, because my participation is more to that vein. I don't have a banking background. I don't have a technology background, and how I came to be involved in this still blows my mind on a daily basis. So I was working as a high-end hairdresser in the Bay Area, and my father was dying of cancer, and I was introduced to a medium. I wanted to tell my father, who was waiting for him on the other side, so that he could let go, because he was suffering tremendously. And I scheduled an appointment with this man, and I had a reading with him. It went on for 4.5 hours, and it changed the course of my life. I developed a relationship with him, and we became friends, and over the next year, my psychic gifts started presenting themselves. So he had initially told me that I could do what he could do, and as much as I wanted to believe that I had superpowers, I really didn't believe him. But my life, the more time I spent around him, just became more and more strange. And about a year into this relationship, it really peaked. So I was having very strange experiences. I was hearing voices. I was up all night with these. It felt like I was in the middle of a crowded restaurant. I was smelling things that weren't there. My inner monologue was taken over in different dialects. And as much as I would love to do accents, I really can't. So I thought, okay, this is it. I am absolutely losing my mind. And he told me that when this happened, to call, because he was going to help me. So I decided, okay, I'll give this guy a call. because I'd rather just like kind of cross this off the list before labeling myself as a crazy person for the rest of my life. So I gave him a call, and he told me, you know, you need to ground, you need to meditate, and you need to protect yourself. And I told you so, basically. And so I did. That day I left work early, and I meditated for the first time in my life consciously. I had been meditating my whole life. I just didn't realize that's what I was doing. So this time I laid in my bed, and with my arms out to my side, and I was like, okay, I'm meditating now. And at that point, a bright light shined out of my right eye, and then my left eye, and then out of the center, and they triangulated, and I felt kind of pinned to my bed. And I noticed I was floating around in my backyard. I was outside of my body. So the very first time I tried to meditate, I left my body, and it freaked me out. And so I had a panic, and I fell back in, and I decided, okay, I'm not going to try that again. So, but me doing that triggered something. I think I had already been drawing attention to myself because I was causing power surges. I would go into buildings and the power would go out. I took out like
light bulbs,
lamp,
yeah.
All the blow dryers in my salon, the washer and dryer. Things were flying off shelves. So I was causing probably anomalies in the grid, and so people probably were turning into my existence at this point. Now that night, after I successfully left my body the first time by accident, I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was one of those nights where you kind of have a dream, and then you wake up in a dream, and then you wake up in a dream, and you wake up in a dream. It happened like 3 times. It kind of reminded me of The Matrix. Anyways, the third time that I woke up and I was actually awake, I noticed my room was lit up like the sun. It was bright. I could feel the warmth on my skin. And I was a little confused because it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I finally adjusted my eyes, and the lights went out. And I noticed 3 beings standing in the corner of my room. And I call them beings because they weren't human, but they did look human. They were much older than the average human would be. They were wearing robes, and they communicated telepathically. And at that point, they instructed me to follow them. And so I rose up out of my body at will on their command, and I followed them out of my house, and I boarded a shuttle, and I was taken underground into a base.
That must have been quite an experience.
I think it was, and I honestly didn't remember all the details of it from the beginning, and part of the reason was because I was taken underground, and I was briefed on what I was here on the earth to do, and what my mission was, and I was not compliant. It involved me leaving my rather large family behind, friends that I had for decades, a business that I had built for a decade, and going on this journey with strangers.
That seems to be the case with almost every person who's had a true, literal spiritual awakening. It completely changes their lives. So I certainly understand what happened to you.
So I protested this, and because one of the things that they told me was like, you're going to try to tell people what you're doing, and they're not going to understand, and it's just going to alienate you more. So you're going to do this, and you're not going to be able to explain yourself to anyone. But you have to do this because you're going to help save the world. And so after about a year of this back and forth, them taking me underground and briefing me on this mission, and I still hadn't fully complied to what I was supposed to do, at that point they forced me to remember who I was. So they basically said, you are going to do this. This is why you're on the planet, and we need you to remember who you are. And they walked me through a process over the next few months of remembering my past lives. And
that must have been very insightful.
It was very insightful, but it was also kind of troubling because the lives that I began to uncover were not, they were prominent historical figures. We'll just say that.
And they weren't easy. I would imagine it was very difficult experience.
It was difficult for me to understand. It was difficult for me to accept. I actually worked with other well-known psychics and doctors that studied reincarnation. Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of my own research and validating throughout this process. And at the end of it, I had uncovered 3 of my previous personalities. And being the logical person that I am and doubtful person that I am, I'm not a person of blind faith. I really needed more assurance. And so what I did was I Googled the name of 3 of my previous personalities in a Google search together. And I found a book. And on the cover of a book were my 3 previous personalities that I had uncovered. They were depicted on the cover of this book. And my partner now is the author of that book. So this is why they forced me to remember who I was, because they needed me to find the other people that I was supposed to be working with. So,
and I would imagine they also wanted you to be fully conscious of your capabilities, whether it's parenthetically past capabilities or current.
Yeah, and
they wanted to bring you up to speed.
Yeah, and they wanted, I think that's also what motivated me to continue the search, was because all of these things were happening to me that I couldn't understand. Like, I jokingly call myself the accidental psychic because this is not a path that I set out on in life. It's not something that I chose. It's more like something that happened to me. And
I do understand.
And so I needed an explanation for why this was happening, because I was meeting with all these other gifted individuals, and nobody seemed to be able to do the things that I could do. And one of the things that I uncovered in this search while working with other psychics was that I had ascended 3 times already in human form, and that is why I had these gifts. I had done this so that I could utilize these gifts in this time. And so after my partner had to start rebuilding the new system, they put me into active duty and brought me in for attempt number, 5,007. Like, there's been so many attempts to do this. So I went into active duty. I found the book, and I looked for him on the internet. I found his contact info, and I started sending him very cryptic and maybe aggressive messages saying, I was going through this kind of...
Did you want to see at some level how much he actually knew, to see if he was up to speed with...
Well, I had purchased the book, and I was reading it, and my story was inside. And not only was my story inside of it, it was basically a prophecy of me finding him. And doing this work. And so I had a lot of questions, and mostly I wanted answers. And so I reached out to him, and we started speaking on the phone, and it was an instant recognition. We knew each other many, many times, and he flew out to the Bay Area to meet me. And at that point, we began working together. It was very odd. I got this. I was sitting on my couch in my living room, and clear as day, this voice pops into my head. And I'd never gotten such a precise message before. But all it said was 3 weeks, 4 days, 10 hours, 52 minutes, 22 seconds. It begins. And I'm like, oh my, what begins? Like, who are you? Why is this happening to me?
Whose voice was this, by chance?
I have no idea who the voice belonged to. Okay. I imagine that it may have come from the beings underground that I had been in contact with. And I later came to know those beings as the Lumerians. And the woman that arrived in my room that night was the High Queen. So she was their leader, and apparently I have a personal relationship with her. Okay. And so I believe they're the ones that gave me that countdown. Um,
And for time reference, this is
yeah.
2000 and or
This would have been almost 4 years ago.
okay.
Um,
So this is relatively recent.
Yeah,
Okay.
so 2014.
Sure.
So the events that set into motion me making the full discovery that included basically this like psychic detective work. I cracked my own Da Vinci Code. I was following voices in my head that were telling me to listen to certain things, and I discovered that, you know, my birthday was written inside the Great Pyramid, and that I was involved in building some of these ancient structures, and so this actually began on a very significant date to a previous personality of mine. It was July 21st of 2014 that I kind of broke through the seal of remembering who I was, and one of those individuals was a shared incarnation with my partner. We were the same person. We were the same person. So this being had two souls weaved into it, a male and female aspect.
Braided.
Braided.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that explains why we had such familiarity with each other. Such a deep recognition in the beginning, and it's worked out for us because we've worked very closely together for the last 4 years, and I guess we're used to close quarters. So
Right, and you can kind of easily finish each other's sentences, thoughts,
Yeah.
and likely sometimes without speaking. You kind of nod at each other and go, right.
Yeah, absolutely. So when he came into my life, he introduced me to a world I didn't know existed. Now, I'm one of those people that came here on a mission. You know, a lot of people feel this. They know that they're here to change the world. They're born with this kind of revolutionary spark in them.
Sure.
And so I knew that, and I was attracted to social progress and philosophy and various forms of spirituality, but I really didn't understand how I would eventually fit into all of that. And so when M came into my life, he introduced me to the world of high finance, of Chinese elders, and a lot of concepts that I really didn't know anything about. And so I got a crash course in Ascension, and I had to learn and very quickly. But when I finally made contact with my group, I began having communications with beings above the earth as well. So my job, my role has been communicating with galactic beings and delivering information to the small group of people that I work with that is pertinent to our operations here on the ground. And just for clarity, because I know that there are a lot of different galactic groups, we'll refer to this group as the High Council from here on out.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
And I certainly appreciate the kind of communication that takes and the kind of focus. There's always a lot of information coming in, whether it's encoded or imagery, et cetera, But it sounds to me like because of the areas of interest that are natural to you, you're almost a blend of a higher dimensional communicator with somebody who feels that social consciousness revolution in a really positive way is really, really important. Is that kind of a good assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, because of my personal experience, have a different approach to spirituality and applying these kind of spiritual concepts to the 3D world, because I believe at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. We are ascending in this 3D reality, and we have to apply these concepts to how we master our emotional bodies with this 3D stimulation.
Yeah.
Like, how do we overcome our need for security, our relationship with money, our materialism, our need to consume? How do we match that with our spiritual path? And how is that? I would say it needs to be very grounded and realistic in order to take foot on a larger scale to reach a larger demographic, because we all have different beliefs and none of them are wrong. They're all our relationships with our creator. And so my understanding of a lot of this came from science, actually, and understanding like frequencies and even philosophical concepts about how we're all just kind of vibrating particles. And so my communications really, and this is how I'm able to communicate with all these different dimensions, including with your crossed over loved ones, is basically by matching my body's frequency to that information. I believe that all the information exists right now in the eternal now moment.
Well said.
And all we have to do to access that is match our frequency to the information we seek. So that's kind of an abridged version of how I found myself at the center of a spiritual revolution. And the reason that I want to talk about this now publicly, because at the risk of everyone thinking I'm a crazy person.
Yeah, which you're not. We've had conversations that you're actually very grounded.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
So the reason I really, myself and my partner and our partners who are still very much behind the scenes want to talk about this now is because the climate on this planet is very negative. And a lot of the stuff that is coming out on the alternative platforms is very doom and gloom, and that's simply not a true reflection of the progress that we've made. And we would like to promote a message of hope. We would like to ignite that flame in everyone and get them involved in any way that we can. We'd like to give people ideas about how they can improve their lives today, how they can start fighting back today, how they can empower themselves and free themselves. And so in order to do that, we think that it's necessary for people to understand the truth about what's really going on.
Yeah, I absolutely understand. It means that, if I understand you correctly, that at some level people are going to have to disengage from the systems they've been entrapped in for years, if they choose to do that.
Yes, and what we are doing as a collective is taking on those systems. Our reality is shaped by the systems that govern us, whether it be education or healthcare. All of those systems need to be reformed. And so there are ways that we can change it on an individual level by, what we consume, what we choose to engage in. But those things really need a system overhaul. And so that is what we are doing. And we would like for people to rally behind that and support it and to engage in their own ascension. We're here to light up the path, but it's everyone's job to walk down it themselves. And no one's coming to save us. It was always going to be us.
That's right.
And so we're going to change the systems that govern us to return this place to a true meritocracy where people can pursue their path of ascension and live a spiritual existence in a natural and healthy environment.
Well, Miss M, that's a great summary about your life, the amazing experiences you had, and how those experiences changed you. I also believe it's a good platform for us to start to dive into some of the details of the topics you'd both like to further address here today. Well, thank you to both of you, M and Miss M, for sharing with the listening audience some very compelling aspects of your own lives that have brought you together and why we're actually here together today. If we can, I'd like us to dive into some of the more detailed aspects of this story of why we are here and what are some of the topics that you guys would like to address in some greater detail. M?
Okay, certainly. I also want to lay a little more groundwork, a little more preamble that'll really prop that up with the strength of the pillars of the story, and that is, for example, how I've got experience with high-level clearance that they called level 35 or cosmic clearance. And it's interesting how that happened. And the reason that I want to do that, because at the time I could ask anything I wanted and I could get information on anything that I was interested in, but I didn't know then what to ask. The way that happened is I was in California, and one day they called me. This was after maybe a year and a half after working with them, and they said, "Where are you right now?" And I said, "I'm in California." "Why?" "Well, there's an arrest warrant for you in Germany. There's apparently somebody posing as you going in and out of banks and trying to cut deals." And I said, "Really? Well, what should I do about that?" And they're like, "Nothing. We'll take care of it." They called me a week later and they said, "Yep, we've apprehended the individual and now we're going to do something to your passport to protect you and to help prevent this." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And please recognize at this point early in the game, I was on a spiritual path. I was in Hollywood trying to tell stories about what I was experiencing in Egypt, my past lives that I was remembering, and my own visions of the future. And in essence, I didn't at the time have anybody I could just ring up or Google search or try to figure out who's doing what to my passport. So I simply asked Spirit, I'm going to jump in with both feet. I'm really a dedicated person, and when I do something, I'm very committed. And so I'm going to need some kind of, sign, some kind of proof that, I'm not throwing caution to the wind.
Sure.
And so it was about a week later, and I had a very high-level person I was on the phone with, and my people had told me, if somebody says, "We're going to check you out," just tell them, "Go right ahead." And that's what they said, that they knew high-level people in agencies, and they were going to run my name. And I said, "Go right ahead." And they called me back the next day apologizing, saying, "You're an agent, aren't you? You're so high up in Langley that we don't get to know anything about you except that your clearance level and your name is so high up. Sorry, so sorry."
So you're a ghost operating at a very high level.
Yep. And they were like, "Okay, how can we help you?" So that happened to me 5 times, by the way. And
Wow.
I was really convinced that I was doing the right thing, because these are third-party confirmations.
I'd like to add to that by pointing out that as individuals on this team, we've been going through our own spiritual initiation, much like everybody else on the planet right now. So the galactics, the military and agencies that we're working with, and the inner earth beings all operate on a need-to-know basis. And so we aren't given all of the information about ourselves or why we're on this journey with them. We have to kind of figure that out, and it's often earned information. And so we are just like everyone else. We are you, and you are us, and we're all in this together. So I'm sure everyone is interested in hearing what the galactics are saying, but I want to take a little time to talk about what they're not saying. And it's really important to use discernment in these times, because how do we tell what is true and what is not when we're living in a world of illusion? And we have to listen with our hearts, we have to use our logical brains, and we have to really think through the things that we're hearing. So I see a lot of times on the internet that we get these messages from, whatever ascended master it may be, if it's Saint Germain, about the deployment of Nasara or Jasara or the RV. And while the rest of the message is quite beautiful and positive and uplifting, it's most certainly not coming from Saint Germain, and this is why. He is a member of the High Council, and that's not a program that we're running. So I really want people to think a little bit harder about this. Where do you believe this money is coming from? And what makes you believe that as an individual you have a right to it? It's quite a bit of money. I believe that this is a propagation of the salvation myth to disempower you from taking your freedom and your sovereignty back, and encouraging you to sit on your hands while the world moves on without you. And so when you hear stuff like that, you really need to think about where it's coming from, what the purpose of it, and what is the reality of it. And, what would happen if a 5 quad was released into the economy tomorrow?
Well, first of all, I don't think people have a real concept of what quadrillion dollars is. But so why don't we actually get into some of the details of what is the reality of what you believe is going to happen, how it's going to be rolled out, the coordination that's happening between the galactics and the good powers here on this planet that are trying to change things for the better. So why don't we focus on the realities of what's about to roll out?
Absolutely, and honestly, it's a lot more positive than you think, and it's a lot more mutually beneficial for everyone on the planet. So the financial stuff is really M's wheelhouse, so I'm going to pass it over to him and let him explain to you what is going on. And I encourage you to listen with an open heart, because it's actually better than you think.
To preface that slightly, many people have followed the story of Saint Germain and the World Trust, and that the intent to have a prosperity program for humanity is at the core of the belief that all this money is going to be released. Let me say that on my spiritual path, and when I wrote my book 20 years ago, and all the deep delving that I did with the Galactics and the Ascended Masters, that I have a pretty profound rapport with Saint Germain. And yes, indeed, the intent is to help humanity and get funds in the hands of the people to do their projects and to effect massive global transformation. However, the Nasara that I was mentioning and the things that have been disempowering, obviously no one's got money from that yet, and that was a very long time ago, that particular subject. And so there's been another subject that has so far disempowered people because it's been going on for 8 years, and that is the RV. Unfortunately, that has been largely a black op program to take people's money, cause them to sit around and wait, and believe that there's going to be an 800 number and that you're going to be able to collect your, $100 million on your $1,000 investment, whatever the crazy ratio of this thing.
Can you make at least one reference to specifically what you're talking about with regard to RV? What is that process? What is that process alleged to be?
That you would buy a currency, whether it's a dinar or a zim or a dong, and that you're going to wait a while and it's going to show up on the currency ledger with a new value, so that you can take something you spent, let's say $50 on, and come home with 1,000. Again, the ratios are irrelevant, but it's, that's the premise.
All right, thank you for the explanation. Just in case there are people out there who don't know exactly what that means.
And I encounter people all the time that don't know what it is.
Okay.
And the same thing with global currency reset.
Right.
GCR.
Okay.
While we intend to do things that do reset the world stage in a financial way, that particular acronym, Global Reset, we're doing as a redemption, so that beginning at a government level, they will be able to turn in their bonds or their things of value, and those will enable that country to begin to have a clean slate, be out of debt, and create positive programs for their people.
Okay. So I have an idea to help the people understand maybe the difference between what's real and what isn't. can you address some of the aspects of some of these topics that can be discussed publicly today? Can you reveal some of those aspects today in terms of what's real regarding these two topics and what isn't?
Okay, so in essence of where is the money coming from? There's been a lot of talk that
Good
the
question.
Rodriguez Trust, any number of big name trusts that are supposedly loaded with 20 zeros
Right.
would be the source of the funds for this type of activity to give everybody this money. There's a bunch of problems with that formula. Authority to move the money, the cabal controlling the bank, flooding the market. I mean, just think if everybody got $10 million, what are they going to do the next day? They're not going to go to work, are they? They're going to start buying things and go on vacation, and there's going to be some chaos probably if everybody had $10 million at any rate. So there's a few problems with just the whole concept of dumping a quad into an economy.
Right.
A quad being 1,000 trillion.
Right. And so the reality of future rollout would look more like
Incremental, top down, starting with countries. But we also are going to do a prosperity program for humanity, absolutely. And we're going to construct that in a way that people that are on these lists are going to get their initial investment back, plus some, and then have a priority opportunity to be funded from trusts that we're setting up to roll out important projects. Because a lot of people that put money into these intended payout programs had good intentions. They wanted to be empowered to do good things for their family or good things for the planet. So, we're going to take those hearts and we're going to empower them to be the transformation agents of positive change. That's not the first thing we're doing, though. The first thing is like what I've said.
I think this speaks more to what my knowledge of the on-ground operations and our partners that are setting up these systems. And so I want to reiterate that this is a systemic reset. And so it's happening on a government level first. And we are still hammering out the details on a civilian prosperity program. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. One of the major ones being that until we eliminate the corruption that has taken hold throughout all government agencies around the world, we cannot deliver funds to civilians.
and the danger inherent in that corruption.
Absolutely. So, if you have a disruptive technology and we give you funding for it, you could be killed, that money could be stolen, and your project won't be deployed. And so these are things that we have action items that need to be covered first, and ending the corruption and getting the governments into a place where they're working for their citizens as opposed to for a shadow government is something that needs to happen before there can be a civilian prosperity program. However, that doesn't mean that you can't start working on your project today. And we need people to start getting a little bit more realistic and bringing their projects into the concrete. And so
we're actually talking about a practical, pragmatic planning process.
Absolutely. So your project has to be humanitarian nature. It needs to be either an ecological project or a project that addresses social issues that we're facing as a population. And so those are the criteria for the projects that we're going to fund. Now, we also need you to be realistic about that project and realistic with your budgets. We need you to start putting together business plans and getting it more concrete. It can't just be a vision that we're going to hand over $50 million for. And it's not because we don't believe in you or your vision, but it's because we want you to be successful. And so another thing that we're talking about is making sure that you have the resources for success, and also that we have a database put together that has a list of all these projects so that we can eliminate redundancy and possibly match you up with somebody else who got the same download or had the same vision, and make sure we're creating a great solution for everyone. We really do want to empower people to live their passion, to live their purpose, and this is the end game. That is the goal that we are aiming for. But we have things that need to be accomplished first, and that also has to do with the source of these funds. There is no such thing as magic money. There is no such thing as money that doesn't belong to anybody. This money does belong to individuals, and they're generously offering it up for this purpose because they have a humanitarian heart and they want to see the people of this planet liberated from their oppressors.
Okay, so turning to the partial banker to my left, and having heard what Miss M just said, what aspects of this topic can you address that practically address how this is going to happen, and maybe where the funds are realistically coming from, how they can be released and or engaged? And whatever and however else you're planning to address this topic.
Well, it's also important to understand that a zero is just a zero. Fiat currency, let's put it this way, doesn't have any value behind it. Right. And so that's a correction that's occurring. So an allocation of gold must be appended to all of these intended zeros, so that there's a real substance.
For people who've been passing around fiat currency, because there are at least two bankers here sitting at the table, fiat currency is paper that's issued based on debt, which means it's debt deep in a hole to the tune of trillions of dollars, and there's no recovering it. It can't be recovered. That whole system, in some form or fashion, has to be brought down. So I think people need to know that fiat currency that we've been using has a very short shelf life, and change must happen. So, Em, continue on your train of thought, if you would, please.
Well, and again, it's about dismantling the concepts that we've been sold hook, line, and sinker, such as the Federal Reserve, or the notion that there's only a swimming pool of gold. They want us to believe all these things are facts, that the Federal Reserve is part of the U.S. government. No, it's not. It's a foreign entity. And so there's a lot of things that we've been told that are not true, that have us believe that, unfortunately, the corrupt government is doing things that are not benefiting us. And so I think it's also important to mention some things about Trump. Trump is actually doing a great job. He's doing a lot of positive things. He is draining the swamp. He is addressing the corruption in all these different places. And a lot of progress has been made, and there are things going on behind the scenes that we're aware of that, for the safety of people, and not to reveal too much before it's time, that will occur that enable us to roll out all these things we just previously discussed.
Okay. So, Ms. M, I see that you have some thoughts formulating here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really wanted to discuss the topic of Donald Trump a little bit, and especially from my perspective, because I am from the most liberal region of the country. I grew up in a very liberal bubble. Mm-hmm. And this has been a very hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. And it's tearing people apart. In fact, just today, I had some very unkind words hurled at me from family members who cannot believe that I would dare to even support this man. And what you need to do is go out and do a little research. Turn off your TV, Stop listening to what the mainstream media is telling you about this person. I'll reveal a little something about myself. I actually happen to also be a Mexican American. And so I was extremely offended by the things that I heard our president saying about Mexicans, especially since my grandparents immigrated to this country from Mexico. But after doing a little bit of research and putting those words back into context, I understood that it wasn't something that he was saying against all Mexicans. It was something that he was addressing, maybe not so eloquently, about a real problem that we're facing with criminal elements crossing the border illegally. And so there are a lot of things that happen, and you kind of adopt this identity that's been given to you about what your morals and purposes are based on what political affiliation you have. And it kind of gives you blinders, and you're not able to see the truth. And so when I stepped out of that bubble and I started meeting people from around the country and listening to them and giving them a sense of humanity, I realized that the belief that I had before when I was living in that bubble, in that echo chamber, that people who didn't share the same views as me were of lesser intelligence. And there was something inherently wrong with them, because how could they think any different than me? But I was wrong.
Yeah, but that's been a key problem with the whole concept of two political parties, and many times currently two very much diametrically opposed political parties. When in fact the reality of the situation is that there is a man, you could call him Trump, you could call him Smith, you could call him Jones. I believe that people should not focus on the personality, but what the appointment of this man was meant to do.
Yes.
And I've addressed this a few times. If I may interject, he's supposed to be an advocate and an instigator of change to clean up the system, the corrupt system that it's been for years. So it's not about Trump the person, it's about the work he's supposed to do. Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that's accurate, and also, I had a good laugh on election night because, like most people, I did not believe this man would win. I didn't think it possible. I didn't even give him the credit to believe he would win. And so I couldn't understand how he was making so many waves. But on the night of the election, I had a good laugh because I understood that he was not the cabal's candidate. And the cabal did not win that night. And that was a victory for all of us.
That's right.
So when you do your research and you start to dig down for the truth, you'll see that this man is not a member of that club. And that, first and foremost, is the most important thing. Because us, as liberators and people who are bearing the light, have the ability to make some significant progress on our mission. Whereas if Hillary had taken office that day, we would have had 8 more years of cabal oppression.
And the mess that we did have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the same vein, neither is Mr. Trump perfect. I mean, none of us are perfect. He's a human who has certain strengths and certain frailties, and he's going to do the job as best as he can, the best way he knows how. The upside is he's not a politician. He's had to learn the role, but the upside is that he is not a politician, and he was brought in to do a job, which is clean up the mess. Em, any thoughts about this or any tangential topics to this one?
Speaking of Trump, he is a positive element. He is aware of what's going on behind the scenes. He does have white hat agency people communicating with him. That's an interesting thing to understand, is that the scales have tipped. There used to be 80% white hat, or rather, there's more than 80 now. It used to be 80% dark and 20% white hat in the Pentagon and the agencies. The Pentagon was the first to shift to all white hat. And, so there's a lot of positive people around this plan to not just make America great again, but to free the people of the planet. So I also think it's interesting to realize that the Galactics have been as helpful as they can, because there's still, to a degree, this Star Trek phrase of prime policy of non-interference, or that the people really want the help, because humans are very capable, and solving problems is something that our ingenuity is really good at overall. And so
right, but don't
they
we
have to want.
Don't we have to clean up our own mess, realistically?
Yeah, there's that as well. Absolutely. Yeah. We own the problem. We live here. The only way to change it is from the inside out.
Right.
And so, to a degree, there is the capacity for them to help. One example I have is when we were doing the new system, and we crashed the Federal Reserve System 3 times, and we kept putting our firewall in, and they were able to get it back. The 4th time, we put in a certain kind of computing that was given to us by the Galactics that enabled it not to be crashed again or hacked and taken back. So there has been different stages along the way where, and we'll get into this in a couple of the other shows, where the scales have been tipped to assist us in accomplishing our goal, our mission. But yeah, truth is stranger than fiction. And that's one thing that we want everybody to understand. There is a divine mission, there are galactics helping, but it's also very imperative that we realize how powerful we are, and how things like self-love and awareness and wisdom, knowledge, all these things that we can be exposed to create the opportunity for us to choose a better life.
Em, thank you for that insight. It was not only compelling, but it was equally as important from your heart. So again, thank you. Ms. M, your thoughts?
Well, I would like to second that. It was really a beautiful message, and in the promise of hope and empowerment, I'd like to just give you a little something that you can do right now to start making the world better for everybody and making the world better for yourself. And so you have more power than you think. We live in a free market. And so you get to vote every day with every dollar that you spend. So start buying organic. Start buying locally. Stop paying for your own disease. Stop paying for your own enslavement. This is how you can free yourself. And this is how you can treat yourself with the love that you deserve. Because we are all God. And so you should treat others like they're God, but you should also treat yourself like you're God. And that means taking care of your temple and filling it with goodness and filling it with the love that you deserve. And we have a lot more to share with you, and we hope that you'd like to come back for more.
Right. Miss M, thank you. This is Tolec for the Andromeda Council. We're going to wrap now. It is February 22nd, 2018. Miss M, thank you so much for your contributions today. And I anticipate that we'll be doing this again, likely in another 2 weeks. Is that?
I hope so, because we do have a lot more to share, and look forward to you returning, where we'll disclose things that are happening and tell you how encouraged we are with the successes that we've made. We didn't get into that. We're laying a foundation, but we are really, really pleased with where we stand today, and we'll be able to further transmit that joy, success, happiness vibe to you.
So are you saying that another couple of weeks are going to go even further down the rabbit hole?
Precisely.
Okay.
We would like to talk about the transdimensional realities, the Mandela effect, the looking glass technology, and disclose a little bit more about what we're doing behind the scenes.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of deep subject matter that we'll get to chew on next time. For M and Miss M and Deep Disclosure, thank you for joining us.